Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, IFLA Risk Register for Documentary Heritage. I am Danielle Fraser, Library Conservator at the Preservation and Conservation Laboratory Heritage Library Division, NALIS. We ask you to keep your cameras off and your mics muted. You are invited, though, to type your questions into the chat for the question and answer segment at the end of the webinar. Let me quickly introduce our organization. The National Library and Information System Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, NALIS, is the country's coordinator of all library and information services. Beyond the Heritage Library, there are over 25 public libraries, libraries in correctional institutions, in secondary schools and primary schools, and special libraries in several government agencies, all administered by NALIS. Please visit our website for more information at www.nalis.gov.tt. We'll post a link in the chat of this webinar. Now, one of NALIS's key responsibilities is to promote and preserve national heritage information. The Heritage Library Division, located on the second floor of the National Library Building, Port of Spain, Trinidad, helps NALIS fulfill the goal of acquiring, promoting, and preserving national heritage information. Special collections acquired or donated to the Heritage Library Division consist of mainly traditional library items created by or of interest to a significant person or organization of Trinidad and Tobago. I invite you to follow the Heritage Library Division on Facebook at NALIS HLDTT. See the link in the chat. The Preservation and Conservation Laboratory is responsible for ensuring the overall longevity of library materials, with attention to the Heritage Library Division and its collection of historical importance. The PAC Lab, which was officially commissioned in 2013, helps NALIS fulfill its role as the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions Preservation and Conservation, or IFLA PAC, Regional Center for the English-Speaking Caribbean. Just recently, NALIS and IFLA signed a new agreement for a further 3-year term from November 1st, 2021. NALIS is a part of a network of 16 IFLA PAC centers around the globe with the aim of providing knowledge and expert advice on preservation and conservation practices within their region, as well as to serve as IFLA's key area of work on safeguarding and promoting cultural heritage. We've continued our mission of raising awareness of preservation and conservation issues through our preservation webinar series. And in case you've missed any of our previous webinars, the link to the NALIS YouTube playlist is posted in the chat. Now let me introduce our facilitator, Claire McGuire. Claire is a policy and research officer at the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA. She primarily focuses on activities related to culture and cultural heritage, and her work includes coordinating IFLA's PAC Centers network and facilitating cooperation between IFLA and partner organizations working in culture. Claire has a Master of Arts in World Heritage Studies from Brandenburg University of Technology, Cottbus, Seftenberg, and a professional background in communication, awareness raising, and advocacy for cultural heritage. We are so excited to host Claire as we hear about the IFLA Risk Register. So over to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for that introduction. And hello to everyone. I'm so glad to be here, and thank you for being here as well. Can you see my screen now? Are we all set?
Just very quickly. Good to go.
Okay, thank you. So again, thank you all for joining today. Just to go over quickly what the agenda for my presentation will look like. I'm going to give a little bit more of an introduction into IFLA and the work we do, including the work we do in cultural heritage, then a bit of a look further into the PAC Center network. And then we'll look a bit at risk and why risk management is important to preservation, and especially focus on risk to documentary heritage. And this is informed by IFLA's experience in supporting libraries during and after disaster. That will lead to an introduction to IFLA's Risk Register for documentary heritage. I will give an overview of the register and its toolkit, and we will look in depth at the nomination process and what information is needed to put a nomination together, and finish with a brief look at how IFLA will use the register, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Again, my name is Claire McGuire. I work at the headquarters of IFLA. We're located in The Hague in the Netherlands, and my focus is on culture and cultural heritage, mainly in policy and advocacy, and I coordinate the PAC Center network. My email is here. Please feel free to take it down if you have any further questions about the Risk Register or IFLA's work in cultural heritage. I'd be happy to correspond with you. So IFLA is the global voice of libraries. You can see our vision here on the screen: a strong and united library field powering literate, informed, and participatory societies. We're proud that we benefit from a strong membership of over 1,400 members from nearly 150 countries in all regions around the world. This enables our vibrant professional community. And we benefit from this professional community as well as from close collaboration with partners at the international, regional, and national levels. Our work includes representing the interests of the library profession and working to improve services worldwide. And we carry out this work in several main areas, including enabling and connecting libraries, inspiring and enhancing professional practice, and advocating for libraries. And this advocacy work focuses on several main broad topics, which you can see here on the screen. One of which is promoting and safeguarding culture and heritage. We connect to libraries, we build professional practice, and we help libraries build capacity to preserve and provide access to culture and heritage within this activity area, and that is what I oversee at IFLA. And the Preservation and Conservation, or PAC Center network, is a vital part of our work in this area. The PAC Centers are hosted in independent institutions that enter into an agreement with IFLA, in which they carry out work to build capacity and address regional and international issues in preservation and conservation. And as you can see here on the map, we have centers around the world, and they often have a speciality both in their region, but also in a topical focus and bringing expertise on a specific practice or a focus on a specific challenge. For example, our PAC Center here at NALIS focuses on the English-speaking Caribbean region, in which they connect professionals around the region and discuss topics in preservation. This webinar series is, of course, a great example of that, but also bring specific expertise, for example, in cold insect extermination, and provide resources that IFLA can share with our broader network. The PAC Centers are a great way that enables international communication and exchange and information sharing, and we're very grateful and thank NALIS for working with us and for inviting me here, of course, today. And I will continue to share some PAC Center resources throughout the rest of this presentation. So now on to the topic of today's webinar. Let's talk about risk. Risk is defined by the ISO standard risk management guidelines as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So if we say our objective is to ensure our institution's collections remain accessible and in good condition for the long term, then the uncertainty of the effect of various agents of deterioration on this objective can be considered risk. Risk can be defined sometimes as consequences times likelihood, but this fails to take into consideration the factors that cause those consequences. And that is an important aspect of assessing, recognizing, and mitigating risk. However, consequence by likelihood can help inform risk analysis, in which you determine what is most likely to occur and how destructive can this be. And this exercise can help set priorities, for example, when working on managing risk. Risk management is all of these activities that we take to identify, assess, and treat risk. That includes disaster risk reduction, preparedness, making a disaster plan, and building capacity to safeguard collections. Of course, risk is very broad, and the risks facing memory institutions go beyond risks to the collections, but engaging in risk management is critical for preservation. Although some disasters, especially those caused by human error, for example, can be prevented with training or following proper procedure, many disasters are outside of our individual or collective control. However, we can manage the consequences of these disasters by managing and mitigating risk in advance. Risk management puts in place a systemic approach to risk with an agreed framework in which all members of an organization or institution use the same criteria to assess risk and to determine approaches to mitigating it. This coordinated action can lead to better outcomes. There are several resources available from the PAC centers that can help you learn more about risk and how it affects memory institutions. This information here has been drawn from a project that we did called PAC FAQs, Frequently Asked Questions, in which the PAC centers provided easy to read, easy to navigate information sheets on areas of their expertise. Specifically, this drew from the PAC centers in Australia and Japan, which focused on risk and disaster risk reduction, which you can find on our website. And I encourage you to have a look at those and the other FAQs for more. Managing risk is especially important to memory institutions like libraries and archives, as documentary heritage is especially vulnerable to agents of deterioration that are often associated with a range of human-caused and natural disasters and their aftermath. Documentary heritage, so books, manuscripts, works on paper, audiovisual material, photographs, archival records, and so on, are especially vulnerable to fire and smoke, to water, either flooding, sprinklers, or from fire response. They're vulnerable to light, heat, and humidity, as well as theft. And this photo here was taken following the fire at the University of Cape Town Jaeger Library in April 2021. And much of the collection was destroyed during the fire. However, preparedness measures that were put in place, namely the library's fire detection system, stopped further destruction of the library's entire collection. These risks are compounded in situations of unrest and armed conflict. In these situations, you'll see several of these risks occurring at once. For example, buildings under bombardment face risk from impact and blast, the resulting fire and smoke, water damage from first responders, and resulting risk from exposure to the elements. As we have seen in past situations, documentary heritage and archival material can also be a specific target, especially in ideological or identity-based conflicts. And this photo depicts empty manuscript boxes at the Ahmed Baba Institute of Higher Learning and Islamic Research in Timbuktu, Mali, which was targeted by extremists in 2013. And finally, I will touch on these sorts of materials are easy to steal, to conceal, and smuggle across borders. And once they enter the black market, it is very hard to retrieve them. I also thought it was important to touch on the threat of climate change, or the compound threats of climate change. And addressing climate change and the threat of climate change is critical around the world, but felt perhaps most acutely in small island states. There's an important intersection to be recognized in disaster risk management between material held in institutions like libraries and community identity and cultural rights. I point to an example from the 2020 report of the immediate past special rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, Ms. Karima Benoon, on cultural rights and climate change. This report details a visit to the island of Tuvalu in the Pacific, whose only library sits 20 meters from the shore and is threatened by sea level rise. The collections contain irreplaceable historical documents, as well as critical records for climate research. And the librarian is determined to save this collection, as the loss would be a loss to Tuvaluians, as well as the collective knowledge of mankind. According to the report, an official asked, if we are not here anymore, what will happen to our culture? And I include this example in I include this example because the special rapporteur also stresses that institutions like libraries, although at risk, have a core role in identifying, imagining, and constructing solutions to such threats. Therefore, taking steps to minimize risk to the institutions and their collections is a critical step to fulfilling this potential and enabling their participation in finding solutions to current and future threats. So if having conversations around the value of taking steps to mitigate risk and assess risk, these are as good as reasons as any to take part in disaster risk reduction and preparedness measures. Preparedness and disaster risk reduction measures taken in advance are critical. From our experience, we've learned that once disaster strikes, communication with and between colleagues on the ground can become incredibly difficult. However, reliable information on where collections are and which collections might be affected is critical. That for us at the international level, having this information at hand can help ensure that libraries and their collections are being considered in damage assessment and recovery efforts taken by international partners in culture and cultural property protection. These lessons were learned through IFLA's engagement supporting libraries both in disaster risk reduction and recovery. We are a founding organization of Blue Shield together with ICOMOS, ICOM, and ICA. And this platform works to promote cultural property protection in the face of armed conflict and other disasters. It is a helpful mechanism to ensure that the library, archive, museums, and monuments and sites areas of the profession are in coordination with one another and with our other international partners when looking at how we can help support our members and our networks following a disaster. IFLA is also an NGO partner of UNESCO, and our relationship includes coordination on disaster response, such as in Beirut in 2020 and currently in Ukraine. Our support for libraries and our members in disaster situations is guided by IFLA's principles of engagement in library-related activities of disaster risk reduction and in times of conflict, crisis, or natural disaster. And I will touch more on those principles of engagement in just a moment. Some ways we help in disaster situations includes coordination and communication between colleagues on the ground and international partners, as well as grant-giving organizations involved in supporting recovery. We provide a network with resources on disaster risk reduction and preparedness, especially through the participation of the PAC centers and professional units in our professional program. Just to give a bit more of a look at how IFLA engages in disaster situations, I wanted to share a brief look at the principles of engagement, which was put in place by IFLA's governing board in 2010. In order to build capacity for coordinated engagement of disaster risk reduction, and in the event of disaster, IFLA carries out these activities. And I won't read through everything, but I want to note that this includes profiling countries and their vulnerabilities to disaster, as well as proactive collaboration. And this leads us to the IFLA Risk Register for Documentary Heritage. The register was launched in 2015 to help IFLA take action on those points laid out in the principles of engagement. It is a proactive listing mechanism that allows us to collect information from institutions ahead of time and respond immediately in the case of disaster. It's a ground-up process in which collections holding institutions can submit their collections for inclusion on the Risk Register. The register's accompanying toolkit allows us to connect many of our existing resources on risk assessment and preparedness. It allows us to connect those resources to users and complement the register with actions that can be taken immediately. The Risk Register is based on other cultural heritage registers, including Heritage Alerts by ICOMOS and the Red List of Cultural Objects at Risk, coordinated by ICOM. However, it fills a gap for a list that is specifically focused on documentary heritage collections in all of their forms. Here's an overview that I hope will help provide some more detail on what the register is and how it functions. First and foremost, the register is confidential. Some registers are used to raise awareness of the necessity of preserving heritage, such as the Memory of the World International Register, or to bring wider attention to material at risk, such as ICOM's Red Lists. IFLA's Risk Register is not shared in order to protect collections and institutions. It is kept in a secure location at IFLA headquarters, and the information is only shared with partners if the situation necessitates it. And I will go more into detail on how the register is used in a bit later. The Risk Register contains information on documentary heritage collections of all kinds and accompanying information on the institution, details about the collections, the risks, and risk mitigation measures that are in place. It is open to any memory institution with a heritage collection. To note, assessment for inclusion on the register is comparative and relative, and it considers that there can be no absolute measure of cultural significance. There isn't a fixed point at which documentary heritage qualifies for inclusion on the register, but in the process of reviewing nominations, IFLA's Advisory Committee on Cultural Heritage considers whether the collection is authentic and if it could be considered unique and irreplaceable. And we'll look a bit more on the information that is submitted in just a moment. The Risk Register complements other lists and registers. It does not seek to replace them. One question we often get is if an institution should list their collection on the Risk Register if it's already included on a national level register, for example. And this is up to the discretion of the institution. We believe that having this information at the international level can expedite our ability to connect to international partners. And the Risk Register may have more scope to include a wider variety of documentary heritage collections than is recognized as national heritage at the national level. However, there's no obligation to list a collection with us, and listing a collection on the Risk Register doesn't mean it needs to be unlisted. It doesn't replace it on other registers at other levels. And finally, the toolkit, the Risk Register Toolkit, is a space where we can aggregate relevant tools that can help you take proactive steps to assess risk and protect collections. So I use the Risk Register. From our experience, we know that disaster is complex, and the support of a network can help better outcomes. This is a proactive step that can be taken as a part of preparedness measures to help allow for fast and effective information sharing that can help assist relevant actors do what they can to support assessment and recovery. And connecting institutions to resources that can help manage and reduce risk in advance is another way that we hope to help institutions with their disaster risk reduction and preparedness measures. And here is an overview of what is available on the toolkit, and I will go over each of these steps now. The first step, which we call Recognize, provides resources to help you learn about and assess risk, including those PAC FAQs that I referenced earlier. These resources can help assess the present risks ahead of making an application to the Risk Register. The second step guides you through making an application to the Risk Register. Here you can see how the registration process works, which I will go through with you in more detail in just a moment. A nomination to the register is made by the institution through an online form. IFLA's Advisory Committee for Cultural Heritage reviews the applications periodically and determines if the information provided is sufficient, and IFLA HQ will alert the institution of the outcome. The information is then securely stored, and in the case of emergency, IFLA headquarters will liaise with the institution's contact person and with our official international partners to facilitate any intervention or recovery efforts that are possible. The final step is REACT, which provides guidance on a variety of interventions, from digitization to storage to pest and insect management, that can help you keep your collections in good condition. Here you can find IFLA principles for the care and handling of library material, which is a great place to get started, overview of information, as well as IFLA's other preservation standards and guidelines, and the whole range of PAC FAQs, which cover a variety of different topics that can help increase the effectiveness of your storage and the safety of your collection. So now that we have an idea of how the register functions and what resources are available to support you in making an application and in assessing and mitigating risk, I'd like to take a look, a deeper look through the nomination process and go over the various pieces of information that are required to make a nomination to the register. I hope this will give you an idea of how you might start the process and what information needs to be gathered ahead of time to make completing a nomination quick and easy. As I mentioned, the institution responsible for the collection makes the nomination through an online form that looks like this. And you will be asked to confirm that you have your institution's permission to make such a nomination on behalf of the institution. So discussing this process internally with your institution is a good first step. The first page requires information about the institution itself, the name, address, and IFLA membership code, if applicable. And I note that neither you as an individual nor the institution is required to be an IFLA member in order to make a nomination. This page also asks you to indicate which international cultural property protection conventions your country is signatory to. And just to touch on this, as perhaps you're not familiar with these conventions, the three that are included in the nomination form are here. That is the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict, the 1999 Second Protocol to the Hague Convention, and then the 1970 Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property. In the form itself, there are links to the dedicated websites for each of these conventions, which are all overseen by UNESCO. At these links, you can find a list of countries that are signatory to each convention, and there you can check if your country has signed, if you don't know. If your country has not signed any of these conventions, that does not mean you're unable to register. In fact, that can put collections at even greater risk, as your country is not bound by these international cultural property protection agreements. Knowing this information in advance is especially helpful in any future interactions we might have with UNESCO. The second page requests detailed information about the collection itself. This information should be specific to one collection at a time. However, if you would like to nominate more than one collection, there's a button to add another collection to your nomination in which you would duplicate this process for that collection. Images are not required, but are very helpful. And you would be asked whether your collection is registered in the memory of the World International Register. And there's also a link there where you can go check if you're not sure. You will be asked whether the collection has already sustained any loss or damage, and how this was caused, and ask to describe the damage that has already been sustained by the collection. And this can help assess future risk. You will also be asked to detail the authenticity of the collection. Is the collection what it appears to be? Namely, can this be authenticated through providing detail on the identity and provenance of the collection, and whether this has been reliably established? And here you can give some more detail as to the importance of your collection to your institution, to the community, at the national level, whatever is appropriate. And the Advisory Committee on Cultural Heritage will use this information to make an assessment based on their judgment and expertise, determining whether the material could be considered unique and irreplaceable to whichever community it could be considered important to, and approve its inclusion on the register. And finally, you are required to give detail into legal matters concerning the collection. If your institution is the owner and custodian of the collection, or if someone else is. All access restrictions should be listed, and you're asked to provide details as to the legal and administrative responsibility for the preservation of the collection. And the final page requests general information over risk and risk mitigation. And here you'll find checklists of types of disasters, where you can indicate which risks your institution may be facing in terms of natural disaster, armed conflict, and human-caused disasters such as industrial accidents or vandalism and theft. This can be informed by existing disaster management plans at your institution or in your region, by your own judgment based on the region, the political situation, extreme weather incidents, or past experiences. We also ask for information and contact numbers or emails from national response agencies and details on any existing national emergency plans. And I would suggest you look online and you can find where the relevant contacts are for this information in your country. And finally, we ask for details on any post-disaster training that staff in your institution have had, specifications for that training, and whether your institution participates in any public or private digitization partnership. None of this information excludes you from the register, but the more information on the situation, relevant contacts, and information as to the capacities of the institution will be very helpful in the case that a possible future intervention is needed. With that, we've looked over the entire, all of the information that is required in order to make a nomination to the risk register. And I wanted to close with a brief look at how IFLA might use the register when and if disaster strikes. We monitor disasters. We use our network, especially the Advisory Committee on Cultural Heritage, that alerts us to possible disaster situations. IFLA HQ will check the register to see if any collections would be affected or could be affected by this disaster. If so, we reach out to the institution's contact person to check on the status and alert them to any information sharing that we might want to engage in coordination with trusted international partners, namely Blue Shield International and UNESCO. We will share information in order to alert them to possible damage at libraries or memory institutions, put the correct people in touch with our contacts on the ground, and work to use this information to help inform any future interventions, such as first aid, assessment, or recovery, to the extent that these interventions are possible. And I can say from my personal experience, working in situations of disaster, having information at hand immediately is really the difference between being able to engage right away and spending a good amount of time gathering information. There's always a need for information, and at the international level, when we are far away from the situation of the disaster, whether natural disaster, armed conflict, or so on, being able to look at information gathered ahead of time and be able to say what collections may be affected and what mitigation might be already in place that can help protect collections is really critical. So I encourage you to share information about the register, to talk about it in your institution, and to consider if you have a collection in your institution that might benefit from inclusion on the register, do not hesitate to make a nomination. And here you'll find the website, the landing page for the Risk Register website on IFLA's website. You'll find links to all of the different information I just went over, the different steps, the material to help you assess risk, the link to the nomination form and more information on the nomination process, and then the aggregate of all of our guidelines and tools and different bits of information that can help you take different steps immediately to safeguard your collection. And again, that is my email here. If throughout this process you have questions, I'm the contact person, so I'm more than happy to help. But I'm also more than happy to answer any questions that you might have now.
Thank you so very much, Claire. Wonderful job in giving us an amazing overview of the IFLA Risk Register. Seeing layout the nomination process, we have a sense of all the things that are needed to do the registration of a collection for an institution. And also we get a better sense, I think, here from your presentation of what IFLA's role is as it relates to the risk register. And so thank you so very much for that. We're gonna, as we wait for questions to come in, I just want to very quickly share with everyone regarding our upcoming webinars. So I hope you're going to continue with us as we move along with our preservation webinar series. On April 27th, we will welcome Dr. Melissa Tadone. She's the lead conservator of the Poison Book Project, and she'll be here to share her team's research as they investigate toxic components of book cloth colorants found in mass-produced Victorian-era cloth-bound books. So I hope you would register using the link that we provide in the chat. I look forward to having you there for that. But let's get our questions in as it relates to the Risk Register. Claire, I actually had one question. You mentioned that the registration is open to anyone and you don't have to be an IFLA member, but do you have to be a library, given that, you know, IFLA is the International Federation for Libraries, etc.? Do you have to be a library institution in order to benefit from the Risk Register?
That's a very good question. And you'll see in the language around the Risk Register, we use the word institution because in some cases, in some countries, there's a very clear delineation between what is a library and what is an archive, for example. In some countries, the library authority is under a completely different ministry than the archive authority. But in some countries, that is not the case. And there could be a bit of a gray area between what institution is holding important heritage collections and what institution is holding records, and where the line between archival records and heritage collections actually is. So I would say no, there isn't a need to be specifically a library in that sense. It is open to interpretation to allow for all different types of memory institutions that are, sometimes outside of a more Western or Eurocentric idea of really clear different types of institutions. So we don't want to exclude anyone. More important is an institution, a memory institution, an institution that holds a documentary heritage collection that can be considered as important to their community at whatever level that is. Of course, IFLA is the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, so we are mostly focused on libraries, but if an institution came to us that identified more as an archive or as a cultural center or something like that, that still had a relevant collection of documentary heritage, they could certainly make an application.
Great. Thank you for answering that question. I think that has always been one of the key considerations for persons thinking of registering, that they may feel, I'm not at a library, so perhaps I don't have the right to, or I won't be welcome to register. So glad to see that IFLA made this open to just about any memory institution housing significant documentary heritage. I know you said that the register is private, and actually we engaged in some searching just recently. We're like, wait a minute, who's in this register? And I know you said that it's private just to protect the institutions as well as the collection, so we understand that. But do you have a sense of maybe how many countries are actually perhaps involved in having their national documentary heritage be a part and be listed?
Well, I don't want to give too much information into the collections that are on the register. There is, you will see as you go through the application, there is a you can give permission for information to be shared more broadly if you so choose. And there are a handful of institutions that have accepted to say it's okay to share the information more broadly. At the moment, many of the institutions currently listed are in Europe or North America, and some in Asia. There is a great amount of space to grow, especially with representation from Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa, as well as from Oceania and different parts of Asia. We aren't looking to target growth in any one specific area. We're welcome any application, but at the moment we do see most of the uptake has been in those areas.
Great, thank you, Claire. I didn't want to push the envelope too much there, but thanks for answering. And I have just one other question. And again, feel free to enter your questions in the chat. We'll be sure to answer them as they relate to the IFLA Risk Register. But one more question from me as it relates to the nomination, well, the sort of activities as they relate to the register. Looking at IFLA being one who's helping to coordinate, providing resources in order to help institutions be a bit more proactive in protecting their documentary heritage. Are you also pointing the way perhaps for funding that might be needed for relatively small institutions who have that need to really make their collections more protected? And a lot of times that's what is necessary. Funding might be the one thing that's missing. I know IFLA in of itself may not provide the funding, but is there any, will that be some of the resources that are covered, that aspect of how do you get funding in order to sort of make your collection more safeguarded?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course, funding is a huge barrier to capacity building in terms of disaster risk reduction. As you said, IFLA is not a fund, so we don't provide funds for these activities. We do share calls when we see many of the partner organizations that we work with perhaps would provide these sorts of funds, and one of which is the Prince Claus Fund always has a regular call for applications for a grant that is specifically targeted to documentary heritage and danger. So we will publicize those calls for applications to our networks, through our listservs, and out throughout the PAC centers as well when they come in. We also, in past situations where there has been a disaster, have directed any sort of emergency funds. We've worked with our partners to try to include libraries in those efforts, or including the library needs at the international level to help raise awareness of and promote the inclusion of libraries in any sort of larger scale recovery efforts. And so again, our role is more sharing information, but if institutions are on the register, for example, and a disaster does strike, it does help us know, if we see opportunities to share calls for funding or grants, information on grants, or funds that are made available for recovery efforts, it helps us immediately have contact people to share that information with. So in terms of getting funding that is more along the lines of the activities that we carry out.
Great. Thank you so very much, Claire, for confirming that, yes, IFLA would help to connect you to some of those opportunities. We'll leave the floor open just a few more minutes, seconds, for if there are any further questions about the IFLA Risk Register. Feel free to put them into the chat, and we will be sure to get them answered. Claire, I just had one question with respect to the nomination process and authenticating, I guess, the collection that you may have. Is it that you have to do sort of an assessment of your collection? Like, how would you recommend organizations go about proving the provenance of their collection, for instance, or the identity of a collection that they may have? Would that mean uploading maybe agreement or donor documents, or what are the sort of things that would be necessary to prove that part of it?
Well, you'll see in the application, as it's through an online form, you're not required to put together a very in-depth dossier of documentation. It is a field in which you can fill in a couple of paragraphs regarding the authenticity. So it's really a summary of what information you have. Has the institution proven provenance? What documentation is in place to prove provenance? So I think being able to confirm that, yes, we have this documentation in place that authenticates this collection. This is where we've gotten it from. This is where it's come from. It's more a summary. I think if there is question, if the advisory committee has any doubts or questions, there could be a case where the institution is contacted to share some more information. But it is more of an overview of what has been carried out by the institution. So it's not something too in-depth. There's no need to put together a large amount of documentation. But having an overview of what documentation is in place and how the institution itself proves authenticity, I think is the most important thing.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Claire. I think in looking at the the nomination process as you laid it out so clearly. I think that might have been like one point that I feel like some institutions may have some issues with, just given maybe the age of their collections and how long ago it might have been given to that institution. You know, maybe it's like, you know, I came here and I met it here. I'm not too sure. You know, how come we have this particular item or these particular items in our collections, etc. So I just wondered with respect to that, you know, I think that might be maybe one of the tougher things for some collections, maybe not for all.
Well, I think in that case, explaining what the situation is will be really helpful. The important thing is demonstrating that the loss of this material would be it's important material that is important, that is unique and cannot be replaced, and demonstrating why that material is unique and cannot be replaced would be the important thing here. So rather than something that is very formalized in terms of a clear history from at each stage of where the material, if that isn't available, demonstrating, giving an overview of the information that the institution does have about the collection and why it is important to whom it is important. That is the most critical step there, and I would to that end just reiterate that if there is a question, if the committee might not be clear, there is always the possibility for secondary follow-up. And again, there's no clear cutoff or point where it can be said, okay, now this means this material is important. You know, it's a very subjective idea. So there is a lot of space for an assessment to be made by the committee using their expertise, their discretion. So I would encourage you, if you were unsure, especially about this point of saying, oh, I don't know if I can prove this, to go ahead and give the information you have. Demonstrate why it's important, to who it is important, to whom it is important, and then put the application in anyway. I would say don't let that be a barrier of a fear that the information is not sufficient.
Claire, I think that was like the perfect answer to end on, talking about our questions and answers. Just sort of saying, you know, give the information as you do have available, submit the application. Don't let that be a hindrance that you may or may not have everything perfectly aligned in order to do the application. Because when it comes to it, we can never predict when a disaster may occur, and ensuring that our documentary heritage is listed in this IFLA Risk Register at least gives us, like you say, the opportunity, the big difference between making a move quickly to help save the heritage items versus, you know, a delayed reaction. So definitely thank you for that encouragement. Is there anything that you would like to end on, Claire? Maybe just a final word before we wrap up?
No, you know, I think you said it better than I could. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate again that I am always available if you have questions, if you would like to make an application but still have doubts, if you can think of maybe another institution that would be a good fit and you'd like to refer them to me, I am available to support you through the process. So any specific questions, if you would like me to look over it ahead of time, if you'd like advice or reassurance on something, please feel free to reach out to me. And I'm happy to give you further advice or help you in a more specific case.
Just as we were ending, there's one question that did come in. Is it possible for NALIS to have risk register for small libraries and museums? And actually remember, the risk register is going to be housed at IFLA, because IFLA has that ability to connect with some of those partners as it relates to disaster recovery, to provide the resources, etc. So it's not going to be housed at NALIS. It's going to be at IFLA in a confidential manner, etc. And yes, it's open, as Claire said, to every institution that houses any documentary heritage. Once you have something that is of significance, that is unique, that is valuable on a local and national scale, so that collection of items can definitely be registered on the IFLA Risk Register. So small libraries, museums, medium size, all the way up to the larger institutions can all have their collections registered in this IFLA Risk Register. Did I have it correct, Claire?
Yep, absolutely. You know, and I think perhaps one additional point there, sometimes at the national level, there can be question as to whose heritage is considered national heritage, heritage of different communities that perhaps are not being recognized, might be left out. So we really want to not exclude any collection based on the size of the institution or for other reasons. So small institutions certainly are applicable. I think the most important thing is if the collection, what the collection is, if the collection is important to the community, and how, I think that is the most important thing.
Exactly. Thank you, Claire. And the comment here following up with that question is saying very beneficial info for small private libraries and museums housing local historical information. Right, so Claire, I'm going to ask if you can share your slide that has your email address, just to be sure that everyone is able to capture that.
I just put it into the chat. If that, I can share the slide as
Great.
well now.
Yeah, I think that will be.
Is that okay? It's there in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire, for adding your email there, claire.mcguire@ifla.org. And also, in case you would have missed it, please feel free to message us as well as at the Analysis, Preservation and Conservation Laboratory. We'll be sure to connect you with Claire directly and help answer any questions as best as possible. And I want to say again, thank you so very much, Claire, for giving this wonderful presentation, for sharing this info, and I hope making it less intimidating to everyone to know that their documentary heritage, regardless of where it's located, can be registered on IFLA's Risk Register for Documentary Heritage. So thank you once again, Claire. Thank you for joining us all the way from the Netherlands. I know it's getting pretty late where you are, so we appreciate you taking this time and presenting for us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to join today.